Good morning, everybody. I'm going to do this one a little bit different because there's some new folks here, so I'm going to start just a little bit differently and welcome you. So my name's Kurt. This is me. That's my bike, and we're about to ride and do the thing that actually started this thing, Freeway Bible Study. So let me put the helmet on first. Sorry for that indecent shot. What is the word? Not very modest. An immodest shot. Okay. So, anyway, I started this project, Freeway Bible Study, in order to share my thoughts about the Bible that I'm reading while I ride that thing, my motorcycle. This is a BMW 2014 year R1150 GS Adventure. It's my little, not very little, pride and joy. I love this thing. Love riding my bike. I do a lot of adventuring with it. Oh, there we go. Let's get it off the center stand. Spend a lot of time, well, not a lot of time. Every 2 weeks on average, I go out to the desert for an overnight and do my wandering and thinking and get the madness out of my head. There we go. Okay, I'm ready to go. So anyway, why am I doing this? Why am I starting it like this? Because there might be some new folks that are going to see this video that who don't know who I am or why I'm doing this, and that's because I accidentally hit the advertise button on Facebook for my Facebook page, Freeway Bible Study. I forgot that I had set that up to automatically execute. I had done that as an experiment for one of my other projects. And so it's like one-click shopping on Amazon. You just click the button, and guess what? You just bought yourself a thingy. And I had set it up on Facebook, so I one-click, and guess what? I accidentally bought myself $30 worth of advertising, which is cool. But it resulted in, at this point, it's been about a week and a half, and almost a tenfold increase, maybe a 9-fold increase in the number of people that are following my page from 10 to no, it would be an 8-fold increase because it would be 10 to about 90, right? Something like that. So I wanted to introduce myself and tell you guys, those of you that have never seen my video here, some of you have seen my post clearly because you've elected to follow this page or like this page, but you haven't seen these videos, which are the heart of this project. So let me begin now. I always have my standard disclaimer. My name is Kurt. Welcome to Freeway Bible Study. My name is Kurt. I'm your host. I'm a non-believer. I'm a former Christian, but I don't believe anymore, and I am studying the Bible, as I've been doing for years. I've gone through the Bible from front to back before, and I'm doing it again. And this project started when I was sent a lovely copy of the Bible. I mean, the person that sent it asked first. That was really nice. Well, they didn't really ask. They just kind of told me they were going to do it. They asked for my address. And they sent me a lovely, lovely Bible. This is a very well-meaning person that's concerned after the welfare and interest of my soul, and sent me a beautiful Bible. It must have been expensive. It's got my name on the front and everything. It's a huge thing. It's an NIV version. Lots of interesting annotations and sidebar stories, so to speak. Oh, and what I've got to do here, you'll see this in the videos, is because this sensor won't pick up my bike, so I have to do a kind of a right turn here. I stop, I'll go over here, and then I'll swing around here, and then do a U-E here, and then I can get on the freeway. So, I was sent this Bible. Oh, thank you. Sorry. I'm sorry I screwed that guy up. That was nice of him. But otherwise, if I try to go straight there, I'll just sit there for 10 minutes because the sensor won't pick up the motorcycle. I'll have to wait for someone to show up beside me. So anyway, this nice person sent me this beautiful Bible and asked me to read it. And I sat it on the shelf at home for, oh gosh, must have been a year, and wondering what to do, and I decided that I would take him up on his offer. I saw it sitting there week after week, month after month. I didn't want to stuff it away because I appreciated the gift and I appreciated the gesture, and I didn't want to stuff it under the bed with, so many other things that I did out of sight, out of mind. So I left it on my table, so it had my attention every day, and I looked at it, and I looked at it, and one day I said, okay, gosh darn it, if that person was nice enough to go to the expense of buying this thing for me, even though I've read the Bible before, back when I was a believer, and I would read it, actually, in fact, other times as well. I've always been curious. I enjoy reading stuff. I enjoy especially little snippets, anything that's a bite-sized story. So I've always enjoyed studying the Bible and religion in general. But anyway, it was sitting on my desk, and one day I said, oh, you know what? I'm going to do this. I'm going to follow through on that request, and I'm going to read this thing cover to cover again. And I started doing it. And I got quite a ways into it. This started probably, quite some time back. I got quite a ways into it. I think I was way out by Joshua somewhere. And then one day I had this idea that, this is actually going well. I'm actually learning a lot. This is interesting. I think I'm going to go back and I'm going to start over, and I'm going to share this experience on Facebook and on YouTube. Because what I found from other projects was that if I study something just for my own consumption, I do a rather cursory job. If I study it for the purpose of sharing, like I'm doing right now, I do a much better job. I mean, I really spend a lot of time. I'll really go through it because I want to do well. I want to make a good performance, so to speak, like I'm doing right now. And I remember, by virtue of that fact, I end up remembering this stuff really well. It sticks in my head, and it's there when I need it, and it's fun. So that's what I did. So I went back, I rewound, hit the rewound button, all the way back to Genesis 1, and I started from the beginning. And I started making these videos, just like I'm doing right now. I have about a 1-hour commute to work each way every day here in Los Angeles. I'm on the 5 freeway right now, headed up to the 55, where I'll make a northbound up to the 55 to the 91, and then on the 91 it's a straight shot out to the desert to work. I live here in Orange County by the beach. Laguna Beach is right over there. So I would start the camera up, Genesis 1, I would read it. I would read it 3 times. Initially I'd read it 2 times. Once in the King James edition, another time in the NIV edition, and then that's the hard copy that I've got. And I usually read it over and over, 2 editions, but several times. I'd think about it, then I'd get down to my motorcycle, turn on the camera, and start talking about what I just read. And it was an interesting thing, because reading about it, saying out loud, and then sharing that on Facebook really hammered the chapters home for me. And now I'm at this point now, I'm all the way up to Exodus 14 now. And I've got a long ways to go to catch up near Joshua where I was before I stopped. But here we are. And so this long preamble, of course, is because we've got new viewers who have no idea what the heck this is all about. And this is probably the first video, if they watch this, is the first such video that they'll see. So now you've got I've explained away what the heck I'm doing, or explained what I'm doing. So next what I'm going to do now is do the part that I do usually, which is just jump right to the point. I've introduced myself. I tell you that, the disclaimer that I'm a non-believer, but I also further that disclaimer by saying I'm not doing this project to necessarily disparage or disprove anything in the Bible. I'm truly trying to be open-minded about this. If it comes across sometimes that I have a skeptical tone in my voice, that's because I am a skeptic. It is my nature, and I don't believe this stuff. So if I see something that looks like nonsense, I'm probably going to call it out as such. Although I'm a diplomatic guy, I'll be nice. But if there's something that is credulous, or if I'm credulous, doesn't make any sense. If there's something that sounds believable, then I'll call that out too. I mean, I'm willing to be converted, and in fact, I start this effort every morning when I sit down with my Bible and I put it on the counter. I'm all alone in the kitchen. I do this. This takes about 30 minutes to an hour every morning. That I get up early to do this every morning, and I sit down and I put the Bible on the table, and I say with a sincere will and effort that if there's anything true in this book, that I want to know about it. And so I am taking this in a very serious way, and I'm trying to invoke whatever spirit there is, although I think those, I don't believe that stuff, so it's hard for me to do that in a serious tone. But I'm going through the motions, like Blaise Pascal, the famous philosopher, with his Pascal's wager. You basically just kind of fake it till you make it, right? So I'm trying to fake it to the best of my ability. So far, no making it. I'm at Exodus 14. We'll see what happens when I get to the end, if I ever do. So let's get to it. Exodus 14. So what I do now is I try to recount this chapter as accurately as I possibly can. So this chapter, this is a really big chapter, and remember when I first started this, if you're with me all along, I was doing about one chapter a day. I'm averaging about one chapter a week now, and this one took me over 3 weeks. I've been at this chapter for over 3 weeks, because this one really, really took a lot of time. Oh, and I've added one more. About 2 months ago, I added a Jewish version of the Bible that is annotated by the famous medieval Rabbi Rashi, so that I can get the Jewish perspective as well. So I have the NIV, King James, and the Jewish annotated version as well. So I'm really getting it from 3 different perspectives, so to speak. So this is a big one. Exodus 14 is the chapter where we have the parting of the waters and the crossing of the chosen people to freedom and liberation, and the destruction of Pharaoh's army. And now, leading up to this, in chapters 13 and 12, the Israelites were wandering through the desert, being led around by Moses and Aaron. And we know that they didn't take the high road up by the Mediterranean because of the Philistines that were up there, and God specifically told Moses to not take the people up there, because they would, if they encountered war with the Philistines, who are well armed, and the Jews are well armed too, the Hebrews are well armed too. They left Egypt as an army, but if they encountered war, they might get cold feet and decide to go back to Egypt. And so he said, let's take them down deep into the desert of the Sinai, and we're in a more roundabout way. And this is what they're heading towards, of course, right? Towards the land where Moses had spent his youth, and where he has his family, his wife and his children, maybe just his son, where he left them behind. He's trying to take them back to that land. And anyway, so at this point, God has told. Well, he opens the chapter by the kind of wandering around in Egypt, going south along the Sinai, and God opens the chapter 14 by telling Moses, "Okay, Moses, I want you to take the people, lead them over to Pi-hahiroth," which is, I had to do some research, which is apparently the name that the Hebrew name for a city, one of the 2 cities that the Jews were built for the emperor Ramesses for the emperor. It was the emperor Ramesses II, apparently. No, maybe I'm getting confused here, but remember when the Jews were first taken captive, I think it's like 430 years prior, when they were first basically enslaved. Because remember, the pharaoh that knew them died, and there was a new pharaoh who didn't have the same, but patronage for feelings for the Jews like the previous pharaoh did, and he enslaved them, and he had them build 2 cities. One of them was Ramesses, the city of Ramesses. So I think it was Ramesses II. One of them was Ramesses, and then the other was a city further south, and these are all on the eastern edge of the Egyptian nation. They're along the Nile Delta. And the second one was a city further south. And I'm sorry, I'm getting all kind of messed up and confused. My storyline is faltering, but I'll get back on track. Anyway, there were 2 cities that were built originally by the Egyptians, and Pi-hahiroth is the name that the Hebrews applied to that second city, which I can't remember its original name, which is to the south. And guess what? It's not very far out of Egypt. In fact, it seems like it's kind of just on the border over there, right? Not that far at all. So God is telling them, hey Moses, take the people over to Pi-hahiroth, and I want you to set up camp in front of Baal-zephon. That sounds like like the Chinese leader. Not Mao Zedong, but Baal-zephon. Anyway, it's Baal, B-A-A-L hyphen, and the last part of his name ends with a Z. And that's a version of the Canaanite god Baal, B-A-A-L, who is kind of like the leader god, the mountain god, the thunder god of the Canaanite people. And in the Old Testament, it's Yahweh's eternal nemesis, right? I mean, the people are, every chance they get, they're building statues to Baal and worshiping Baal, and Baal's mentioned many times in the Bible. So he's kind of like he's like the Joker to God's Batman. So the curious thing, God specifically tells Moses to set up camp in front of the statue of Baal. Now, if you read the Jewish commentary on this, Rashi, the famous rabbi, says that this was done in order to hearten the Egyptians because they would say, "Wow, look at that! Our God is mighty," because the people of the Jews have become confused. The Hebrews are lost in the desert, and they've set up camp in front of our God. Now, we know that that's not right. Clearly, Rashi was incorrect, because Baal is not an Egyptian god. There is an Egyptian god, I can't remember his name, that is the equivalent, but it's not Baal. Baal is a Canaanite god. So that kind of led me to wonder, could this be a clue that in fact Yahweh is in fact Baal? You know, that's we're displaying Yahweh is showing his roots, so to speak. Because wouldn't that kind of make sense for God to say, I want you to go to Pi-hahiroth, or whatever it's called, and set up camp in front of the statue of Baal, which is me, because that will encourage the people by seeing that they'll see the statue of me. I don't know. So that got me thinking. So anyway, there they are. They're camped and set up camp in front of the statue of Baal and in Pi-hahiroth and Pi-hahiroth. I'm not saying it right. And guess what? One more thing about this. If you look that up on a map, as I did, it's nowhere near the Red Sea. Okay, it's close to some swampy areas, some reed seas, and in fact, the Red Sea is a mistranslation of Reed Sea. So that would make sense that maybe what they were crossing wasn't the Red Sea, but it was a Reed Sea, and there are marshy, little swampy, lake-like areas just right around that city area, the ruins of that city, where indeed they could have set up camp. Oh, and by the way, that city was ruins at that point. There was nothing there, so it was basically a ruined place. Likewise, so was Ramesses, which is the city that apparently they set out from. The people were in the city of Ramesses. You know, if you count 600,000 male Israelites leaving with all the women and the children, if you triple that to be conservative, right? One woman and one child for every one. That's what, 1.8 million people. I wouldn't say that Ramesses, the city of Ramesses, was uninhabited if there were 1.8 million people living there, yet archaeological evidence from that time shows that it was indeed uninhabited, with the exception of maybe some nomads that came through from time to time. So not holding up. We're not seeing consistency from the historical record for this stuff. But anyway, so there they are. They've made their way over. They're camping now in front of the statue of Baal, and what's happening now is that back in Egypt, word comes to Pharaoh that the Hebrews are confounded by the desert, hemmed in by the wastes, and lost and dazed and confused. And Pharaoh is hardened. God says he will harden Pharaoh's heart so that he will come out and pursue them. So is that very fair? Where's the free will in that? So anyway, Pharaoh and his counselors get together and they say, well, clearly this was a mistake. We shouldn't have let the Hebrews go. Let's go get them, boys. And so that's what they do. So Pharaoh summons, this is a strange use of language, 600 of his best chariots, plus all the rest of the chariots of Egypt. So why don't you just say all the chariots, right? So he's got the 600 best plus all the rest. Not only that, but he's got all captains over all the chariots, And we know from, I've done the research, we know that each chariot, at least the best of them, required 5 attendants to run alongside to go after them. So he summons this army, and he says, well, off we go. We're going to go in pursuit of the desert. Now, we know that they're 3 days journey. It took the Hebrews 3 days to get to Pi-hahiroth, or whatever it's called. Now, of course, they took a roundabout way, so let's assume that maybe Pharaoh can use half that time, a day and a half maybe, to get there. But they're on chariots. Well, you think that would be fast, but not really, because this is not the high road, this is the low road, and these chariots are designed, we know what New Kingdom chariots look like, and what we've got evidence, they've got some remaining from tombs, and they were not designed and built to go through open desert. They were designed and built for flat, open spaces without any rocks. They were easy to break down. They required lots of maintenance. You needed to have proper craftsmen with you, or along the way who could fix the things. So I'm thinking, even though that they might have been able to get there faster and in a more direct route, it probably took them a long time because they had to stop to fix things. The chariots didn't move so well. I spent a lot of time, like I said, out in the desert wandering around, and it ain't easy moving. I can't imagine taking a 6-spoked or a 4-spoked, or heaven forbid, a 2-spoked wooden chariot through that kind of stuff. And what about feeding and watering all the animals and the men? Anyway, they wind up there anyway. And by the way, these chariots are not owned by Pharaoh exclusively. These are basically the property of the charioteers. That's one of the ways you could gain honor in ancient Egypt, was to bring your chariot to Pharaoh's service. And do you really want to take your chariot out to the desert like that? I don't know. But anyway, they make it. And now the day comes, and the Hebrews are camped there in front of the statue of the god Baal, and they wake up in the morning, and there are the Egyptians setting up camp nearby. And they're like, oh no, we're doomed. And they go to Moses and they say, why, Moses, why did you do this to us? Sorry for this, strange voice. It's just, I'm a silly guy. But, why do you do this? Were there, and I'm trying to quote directly from the Bible now, it says, were there not graves enough in Egypt for us that you had to take us to the, hey guys, that you had to take us to the desert to die? And, the people they're scared, right? And they're doubting. Now, I don't know why they're doing that, because all along they've been following a pillar thing. It's like a pillar of cloud or smoke during the day, and a pillar of fire at night that's leading them along, guiding them through the desert. Now, I would think that if I was a runaway slave, because that's exactly what they are, because it said they'd be gone for 3 days and they didn't come back, and Pharaoh's attendant said, hey, they're taking off, they're fleeing. If I was a runaway slave, I don't think I would be very concerned about much of anything. If I had a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire leading me away from my captors, I'd be like, yeah, there's some serious, powerful thing with us, and it seems to care about us. I think God's on our side. But no, the Hebrews were not so inclined to think. They went to Moses and they complained bitterly, and Moses went to God, and God kind of just gave him some placating words, and he basically said, tell the people not to worry. Tell them they need do nothing but watch, that I've got it all under control. He says that very clearly, that this is a non-participatory event that's about to occur, that the Hebrews need to do little more than walk and have courage. And so what happens is that as the evening begins to fall, the army of the Egyptians has been setting up their camp, and the army of the Hebrews, the people themselves, they are an army after all. They've got weapons. They're kind of positioned there with the sea, maybe it's actually a swamp, to their backs, and the Egyptians just before them. And at that point, as the evening falls, this cloud fire thing, that is the presence of God, moves around the Egyptians and around the Hebrews and sets itself up between the Hebrews and the Egyptians. So it's like a wall of fire and cloud. Well, maybe not a wall, but you know what I mean. No one's gonna cross through that thing, where it's got the cloud. The cloud is obscuring the view, and its cloud side is on the Egyptian side to obscure their view, and the fire side is on the Hebrew side to give them light through the night. But not only that, we actually learned that there are two entities that are actually with the people at this time. One is the cloud fire thing, which is, I believe it's like God's, it's what God's riding on, because later we're going to hear that God is actually looking down from or through the thing. In the King James, I think it says that God is like looking through it, almost like a crystal ball. Then in I think it's the New International, it says that God is looking down like he's riding on top of the thing. But anyway, I said there's another entity there, and that is the angel of the Lord. And the angel of the Lord actually went first around the people and set up him or herself, or itself, between the Hebrews and the Egyptians, followed by the cloud of flame and smoke or cloudy or whatever the heck it is. And now you've got the two are separated. Now God goes to work. So now you see what I mean? The Egyptians are kind of blocked. They're not going to attack, and this is the start of the night. This is going to happen all through the night. What happens is God tells Moses, raise your staff, or your rod, as it's called in the various books, staff or rod. Excuse me. And we know that the rod or the staff thing is important in Mesopotamian religious tradition. Shamans and holy men are all over the place. You're using staffs and rods to demonstrate their power and as instruments of their authority. And anyway, God says, raise your staff and your rod, Moses, stand next to the waters and hold your hand out over the waters, and the waters will part in front of you. And so Moses does. Now, for all the drama, excuse me, I keep raising my lid on my helmet. For all the drama in this, there's not a lot of time spent on this in the Bible itself. It's actually just a few short lines. And now we can picture in our minds the waters are parted. Wall of water on either side, and there's dry land, or maybe it's kind of a muddy quagmire, but probably it's dry. Hey, if God can part the waters, he can dry the land. And now God says, take the people, Moses, lead them across the waters to the safety of the other side. And they start doing that, and it goes on all night long through the various watches of the night. The 1.8 million plus people of the Hebrews are making their way through the waters. Now just imagine what that must have been like, because they're being lighted by the pillar of fire, so they can see these walls of water on the other side. And I wonder, can they see fish in there? What's going on? And just with all the drama that you imagine of Charlton Heston in the movies, right? Now, as the people, it's not completely clear that the people all made it all the way across when the next part happens, but I imagine that they did. I picture that they made it all the way across. They're at the other side. They're kind of, getting themselves situated, and Moses comes back and stands by the edge of the waters with this whole parting of the gap, and he's watching now as God releases the Egyptians to follow. And he does this in two ways. Clearly, he's going to move the cloud so that they'll can pass, and then, even though it doesn't say that, I assume that's the case, but the most important thing is he once more hardens the heart of Pharaoh. But he doesn't just harden the heart of Pharaoh, he hardens the heart of all the Egyptian army. And we don't know that everybody went down into the water, but a lot of them did. And the Bible indicates, well, not really by the Bible, it's Jewish interpretation of the Bible. It indicates that Pharaoh was at the head of his army, that he actually went down, was getting his chariot, had his chariot ready, and took off in the lead of the army. So he was going first. Now that's important in just a minute, so just put a pin in that. Now all the Egyptians are, they're charging through the gap in the water. They're afraid, of course, but God has hardened their heart to make them. He's set up a trap, and he's usurped their free will in order to force them into the gap and into their doom. So that's interesting to note as well. And of course, now we all know the rest of what happens. They get down there, and at God's word, God says, okay, Moses, now! And Moses raises his staff in his hand, and the waters close back over the gap. and engulfing the Egyptians and drowning every one of them. The Bible says not one who entered the gap between the waters survived, something like that. We just know that anybody that went forward into the water that was Egyptian, they all died. And their bodies then washed up, the Hebrews could see the bodies washing up on the shore next to them. And all the horses too. All the horses that went, and all the chariots were gone too. So now, at that point, that's basically the end of Exodus 14. They've made it across, they are liberated, the enemy, the foe is vanquished, and great glory and honor has been had by Pharaoh. It's a big, glorious event. This is the money shot for basically one of the money shots in the book of Exodus, and possibly that's why I spent so much time studying it. Now, the Jews go on to say that the Jewish tradition holds, at least there's a few Jews that I know, Jewish men that I know who have bothered to comment, who have taken the time, and I appreciate that. I don't mean to say that in any disparaging way. I mean, I greatly appreciate the fact that they have taken the time to do that. There's 3 Jewish men in particular that have chimed in as I'm reading this and have offered a commentary, advice, links, and the like, and I greatly appreciate that. But the impression I get from them is that the Jewish tradition holds that Pharaoh survived, and that he either went back to Egypt or he went on and became king in another country, but that he was won over by this event, and he believed, which was one of God's goals, one of God's stated goals in this whole process, was to cause the Egyptians to know, and the Hebrews to know, that Yahweh was the one true Lord, or is the one true Lord. And Jewish tradition holds that he may have actually gone on to become a king somewhere else to spread the news of the Lord. Although I've been pressing, and I've been trying to find evidence for why people think that, and I haven't found any yet. Mostly just the assertions of respected rabbi. And that's it. So that's pretty much the end of that chapter. I feel like I'm missing something. There was something else that I wanted to say. Lots and lots of sidebar conversations. I don't know if that's the right term for it, but you know what I mean. It's sidebar, kind of like, you would take an aside and go off and think about for certain things. Lots of stuff came up in this chapter. Basically, this one puts the nail in the coffin for me so far in terms of Exodus, history or myth. It could be a mix of both, right? But I'm more. I remember the thing that I wanted to talk about today. The side thing that came up. The side thing came up that I actually spent almost a week studying. Was that my studies of Exodus 14 led me to the discovery of something called the Babylonian Tablets of Creation. Now, the actual formal name of that isn't that. It's the first 2 words of the actual tablets. Actually, I can't remember. It's in Babylonian. But we'll just call it the Babylonian 7 Tablets of Creation, which date from the end of the second millennium, or the beginning of the second millennium BC, to 2000 BC or so, or at least some of the originals do. And they are basically, just as they describe, 7 tablets that describe the events and the order and events of the creation myth. And wow, oh wow, it's very interesting to read because in so many ways they parallel the creation story outlined in Genesis and Exodus, including the initial presence in Exodus 1 of basically the waters and the chaos and the darkness, and then the deity that then begins creating things from that, including creating man from soil and blood and bone, similar to the way that Eve was created in the second creation effort that God made. Because of course God creates man and woman twice in Genesis. once out of whole cloth, the second time out of dust and bone. And in the creation myth, it does the same thing. Now remember, the Babylonian creation myth predates the biblical account. And then we go on to have now it's failing me. There are several analogous similarities between the two, and I can't remember the rest. But it's quite a compelling comparison. The big difference, of course, being that in the Bible, Yahweh, a single God, a monotheistic tradition is started, whereas in the in the Babylonian tablets of creation, we've got a pantheon where the first god and goddess go on to create a whole, wow, that guy's got machine guns on his car. Let's take a closer look. Interesting. They've got to create a whole pantheon of gods and goddesses to rule the universe, and there's all kinds of confusion. And man is created in the tablets of creation to serve these gods, not as their prized possession or prized creation. Anyway, I spent so much time doing that, and that really did. And then further question was, how did this happen? How did the connection occur between the Babylonian tablets of creation and the Bible? And then it became quite clear when we remember that Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king, went and kicked Judah's butt, which is Judah being the old name of the land, the Levant, where the Canaan, where the Israelites were living, kicked their butt and destroyed Jerusalem. But before he did that, he took the Hebrew leaders of Jerusalem and their families hostage, took them back to Babylon, and then in the following year came back and destroyed the temple and kept them captives for, I think, 60 or 70 years. They were kept captive in Babylon, where they must have picked up all kinds of Babylonian culture. And that was at the time when the Babylonian tablets of creation were at their height. I mean, that was the thing in Babylon. If you're going to stay 3 generations in Babylon, your family's going to pick up that story. And then it was Cyrus the Great, after Nebuchadnezzar died, the new king, Cyrus the Great, decided to return. He had a different way of handling his hostages. He said, I'm going to return them to Jerusalem, and guess what? I'm going to send them back laden with gold and silver so they can, guess what, rebuild the temple. And so they returned, 2 or 3 generations later, with laden with gold and silver from Babylon, and I'm sure they had the tablets of creation story in their head to rebuild their nation, so to speak, rebuild the temple. And would it then be any surprise that they wouldn't borrow from the Babylonian tradition some of the mythology and the creation of their own mythology? No, that wouldn't seem far-fetched at all. So no wonder the Genesis and Exodus ring with the reverberation and echo of the Babylonian mythology. It seems so clear. That was a huge revelation. So when I say that my study of Exodus 14 has put the nail in the coffin of both Genesis and Exodus being myths, I mean, it really has, especially when we weave together that story. And wouldn't you think that is also the true Exodus story? That it wasn't, a guy almost got wiped out yesterday. A guy in the same lane came swooping in on me. So I'm going to be careful, get over to the left. Wouldn't that make much more sense as well? That it wasn't, because there's no evidence that the Jews actually were enslaved in Egypt for 400 years and that they left in the mass exodus. There's no evidence for that whatsoever. But we know for sure that they were held hostage. The leadership was held hostage in Babylon for 60 plus years and were liberated and went back and triumphantly returned and rebuilt Jerusalem. And wouldn't that be the true Exodus story? But that's not a very compelling tale, to say that we were taken hostage, a new king came on board, he liked us, he sent us away with a lot of gifts so we could rebuild our temple. That's not a very compelling tale. Why don't we make up a story and say that we were enslaved in Egypt for 400 years and God liberated us in a most dramatic fashion? Yeah, that's a much better tale. And that's exactly what I think that happened. And that's exactly why one of the reasons why I'm increasingly believing that we're dealing with nothing more than another myth. And all the more reason why I remain a non-believer. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop. Thank you for joining me for this long Freeway Bible study. This is probably one of the longest I've done in quite a while, but I think it was required given the fact of how much studying I had to do in Exodus 14, which was a watershed a chapter in my study of the Bible, a really momentous one, and the details of which I know are buried deep in my brain. As we heard recently, I'm sure if this video is seen in the future, you won't have any idea what I'm about to say, but engraved deep in the hippocampus is the memory of Exodus 14 and the events of the Jewish and Hebrew liberation from Egypt and subsequent freedom and the destruction of the Egyptian army. And with that, I'll say goodbye. Thanks for joining me, everybody. Have a great day. Make it a good life. Take care.